My husband stood up in the middle of our 10th anniversary celebration, champagne glass raised, and told 200 of the city's most influential people that I was playing entrepreneur, while he funded my little hobby business. The ballroom went silent. I smiled, set down my glass, and walked out of the Meridian Grand Hotel knowing I would never ask him for another dollar. He had no idea that the venture capital firm at Table 17 had just sent me a text offering $8 million in series of funding. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandeliers of the Meridian Grand Hotel cast prismatic light across 200 faces turned toward the raised platform where my husband Marcus stood, champagne flute elevated. His expression carrying that particular combination of affection and condescension I had learned to recognize over 10 years of marriage. The anniversary gala had been his idea, a lavish celebration of our decade together that doubled as a networking opportunity for his commercial real estate empire. The guest list read like a directory of Chicago's business elite. Developers, investors, politicians, media executives, and the kind of generationally wealthy individuals whose names appeared on hospital wings and university libraries. I sat beside the platform in a midnight blue gown that had required 3 fittings and cost more than my first car. My posture perfect, my smile practiced, playing the role I had learned to perform flawlessly over the past decade. The supportive wife. The elegant hostess. The woman whose own ambitions remained tastefully subordinate to her husband's empire building. Marcus had spent the past hour working the room with the charisma that had built Castellan Properties into a $200 million enterprise, and now he was ready to deliver what everyone expected. A touching tribute to our marriage, to partnership, to the woman who had stood beside him through the challenging early years when he was building his company from nothing. His speech began predictably enough. Charming anecdotes about how we met at a charity auction where I outbid him for a painting neither of us particularly wanted. Humor about the disasters of our first apartment, with its unreliable plumbing and temperamental heating. Appreciation for my patience during the 70-hour weeks he worked to establish his first major development project. The audience laughed and smiled and raised their glasses at the appropriate moments, and I maintained my composed expression while something cold began forming in my stomach. Then the tone shifted. Claire has always been incredibly supportive of my work, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone comfortable with public speaking. She understood that building something meaningful requires sacrifice, requires focus, requires that one partner sometimes carries the weight while the other provides stability at home. The phrasing was careful, diplomatic, but I heard what lay beneath it. One partner builds, the other watches. Recently, Claire has been exploring her own business interests, he said, and something in his tone made several people in the audience exchange glances. She has been working on a consulting venture, advising small businesses on operational efficiency and growth strategy. It has been wonderful to watch her find something that engages her talents and gives her a sense of purpose beyond our household. My hands clenched in my lap beneath the table where no one could see. Beyond our household. As if the past 10 years of managing our lives, hosting events that generated millions in deals for his company, and building relationships that opened doors he could never have accessed alone were merely domestic maintenance rather than strategic partnership. I have been happy to provide financial support for her venture, Marcus continued, his smile indulgent and warm. Seed capital to help her get started. Office space in one of our buildings. Introductions to potential clients who might benefit from her services. It has been my privilege to help her explore this entrepreneurial phase, to fund what amounts to a very expensive education in business realities. The ballroom had gone very quiet. People were no longer smiling. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious, waiting to see where this was heading. A few looked sympathetic, their expression suggesting they thought Marcus was being generous in supporting his wife's midlife exploration. Building a real business, Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious, more pedagogical, requires more than good intentions and surface-level advice. It requires capital, connections, and most importantly, the ability to operate at scale. What Claire has built is admirable for what it is. A small consulting practice that keeps her engaged and provides some supplementary income. But let's be honest about what it actually represents. He paused, looking directly at me with an expression that managed to convey both affection and dismissal simultaneously. My wife is playing entrepreneur. She is learning what it means to run a business by operating what amounts to a very well-funded hobby, and I am proud to support that exploration, even when it costs me considerably more than it generates in return, because supporting your partner's growth and self-discovery is what marriage means. The words landed like physical blows. Playing entrepreneur. Well-funded hobby. Costs more than it generates. Every phrase was carefully chosen to sound supportive, while fundamentally diminishing everything I had built. Every word positioned him as the benevolent patron funding his wife's amateur excursion into business, while he managed the serious work of actual wealth creation. 200 people sat in silence, uncertain how to respond to a tribute that had transformed into something else entirely. Some looked embarrassed for me. Others looked relieved that they were not the ones being publicly categorized as a spouse pursuing an expensive hobby. A few looked genuinely angry on my behalf, their expressions suggesting they understood exactly what Marcus had just done. I felt my face flush, heat spreading across my cheeks and down my neck. My hands were shaking beneath the table. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of subordinating my own ambitions to support his. 10 years of being told that my contributions were valuable, that partnership meant different roles but equal worth, that my time would come once his company was established and stable. And now, in front of everyone whose opinion mattered in Chicago's business community, I was being publicly defined as a hobbyist playing at entrepreneurship with my husband's indulgent financial support. Marcus raised his champagne flute higher. To Claire, who brings joy and purpose to everything she attempts, and to 10 more years of supporting each other's dreams, no matter how different those dreams might look. The audience applauded, the sound polite and awkward, people going through the motions of celebration, while clearly uncomfortable with what they had just witnessed. Marcus stepped down from the platform, leaned over, and kissed my cheek with genuine affection, apparently oblivious to the fact that he had just publicly eviscerated my professional credibility. My phone vibrated in the small clutch purse I had placed on the table. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. I ignored it, my focus entirely on maintaining composure, on not allowing my face to reveal the fury and humiliation churning inside me. The orchestra began playing again. Conversations resumed at nearby tables, voices carefully modulated to exclude us from overhearing what were undoubtedly dissections of what had just occurred. Marcus sat down beside me, his hand finding mine under the table, squeezing gently. "I hope that was all right," he said quietly, his expression earnest. "I wanted to acknowledge your work publicly, to show everyone that I support what you are building, even if it is still small scale." I looked at him, this man I had married a decade ago, and realized with crystalline clarity that he genuinely believed he had been complimentary. He thought he had given me recognition. He thought describing my business as a well-funded hobby was generous acknowledgement rather than devastating dismissal. He had no understanding whatsoever of what he had just done, no comprehension that he had publicly positioned me as an amateur whose business existed only because of his financial indulgence. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "I need to use the restroom." I stood with practiced grace, smiled at the nearest table, and walked toward the ballroom exit with my head high and my posture perfect. Every step felt like moving through water, my body functioning on autopilot, while my mind tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The hallway outside the ballroom was blessedly empty, decorated with more flowers and elegant lighting but devoid of witnesses to the moment when my composure finally cracked. I leaned against the wall, pressed one hand against my mouth, and allowed myself 30 seconds of pure, unfocused rage. Then I pulled my phone from my clutch and checked the messages that had vibrated during Marcus's speech. 3 texts from a number I did not recognize, sent in rapid succession during the moments when my husband was publicly defining my professional life as an indulged hobby. "Ms. Castellan, this is Jennifer Wu from Apex Ventures. We have been tracking your consulting firm's growth over the past 18 months. Your client retention rate and revenue scaling are remarkable. I was not planning to approach you at a social event, but given what just occurred on that platform, I wanted you to know that what you have built is far more than a hobby. Step outside the main entrance. We should talk about series of funding. 8 million subject to due diligence. Your husband has no idea what you have actually created." I stared at the messages, reading them twice to confirm they were real. Jennifer Wu. Apex Ventures. One of the most selective venture capital firms in the Midwest, known for identifying high-growth companies in their earliest stages and providing not just capital but strategic guidance that transformed regional businesses into national players. They typically invested in technology companies and scalable service platforms, not small consulting practices that my husband would characterize as expensive hobbies. My phone buzzed again. A fourth message. I am in the lobby. 5 minutes of your time. What I am offering will change how you think about what comes next. I looked back toward the ballroom doors, elegant and closed, beyond which 200 people were drinking champagne and networking and probably discussing what they had just witnessed. I thought about walking back in there, resuming my seat beside Marcus, smiling through the remainder of the evening while people offered sympathetic glances or carefully avoided eye contact. I thought about going home to the penthouse apartment I had decorated and managed and turned into a showcase for his success, waking up tomorrow and continuing the pattern that had defined the past decade of my life. Then I thought about Jennifer Wu from Apex Ventures waiting in the lobby with an offer that suggested she saw something in my business that my own husband had publicly dismissed as amateur entrepreneurship. I walked toward the main entrance, my heels clicking against marble floors, my gown trailing elegantly behind me. The lobby of the Meridian Grand Hotel was quieter than the ballroom, with conversation grouped in small clusters near the bar and seating areas. Jennifer Wu stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, her silhouette backlit by city lights. She was perhaps 40, with black hair cut in a severe bob, and the kind of focused intensity that came from evaluating hundreds of business proposals and identifying the few worth substantial investment. She turned when she heard my footsteps, her expression assessing and direct. "Claire Castellan," she said, not as a question but as a statement of recognition. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Walk with me," Jennifer said, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the lobby away from other guests. We moved in silence until we reached a seating area that was elegant and empty. She sat in one of the leather chairs and gestured for me to take the one opposite. "I apologize for the unorthodox approach," Jennifer began, her tone businesslike and precise. "Under normal circumstances, I would have scheduled a formal meeting through your office. But what I just witnessed in that ballroom changed my calculation about timing." I found my voice. "You were at the gala?" Apex Ventures purchased a table. We often attend events like this to maintain relationships and observe the ecosystem. I have been aware of your consulting firm for several months. We have been watching your client acquisition, retention rates, and revenue growth. The metrics are exceptional for an 18-month-old consulting practice. She pulled a tablet from her bag and turned it toward me. The screen displayed what appeared to be a detailed analysis of my business. Client list, revenue figures, growth trajectories, retention statistics, all presented with the kind of depth that suggested months of research rather than casual observation. "Your husband described your business as a small consulting practice that provides supplementary income," Jennifer said, her tone neutral but her meaning clear. "The actual numbers tell a very different story. You have generated $2.3 million in revenue over the past 18 months with 87% client retention, and an average contract value that has increased by 40% quarter over quarter. You have achieved this with minimal external capital, no formal sales team, and what appears to be a deliberately low-profile approach to business development." I stared at the tablet, at the analysis of my company that was far more comprehensive than anything I had prepared myself. "How did you get this information?" "Public records, client references, industry analysis, and conversations with several of your clients who are enthusiastic about the value you provide. We do thorough due diligence before approaching potential investments." Jennifer leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Castellan, what you have built in 18 months typically takes companies 3 to 5 years to achieve. Your operational efficiency model and your approach to client transformation have created something genuinely scalable. This is not a hobby. This is a business with the potential to become a national consulting platform." The words landed with surreal weight. For 18 months, I had been building my consulting practice in whatever time I could carve from managing Marcus's household and supporting his business development. I had started with small clients, local businesses that needed operational guidance, but could not afford the large consulting firms that typically commanded six-figure engagements. I had developed methodologies that delivered transformation without the overhead costs that made traditional consulting inaccessible to growing companies. I had built systems that allowed me to work with multiple clients simultaneously without sacrificing quality or attention. And I had done all of this while Marcus described it as my entrepreneurial phase, and funded what he considered an expensive education in business realities. Your husband's speech tonight, Jennifer continued, her voice carrying an edge now, demonstrated something important. He does not understand what you have created because he is not paying attention. He sees surface elements, the consulting contracts, the small client list, the modest office space, and he interprets all of it through the lens of his own experience building a traditional high-capital business. He cannot conceive that you have built something fundamentally different, something that operates with completely different economics and completely different scalability. She closed the tablet and set it aside. I am offering you $8 million in series of funding at a valuation that reflects the business you have actually built, rather than the hobby your husband described. This capital would allow you to hire a team, expand your operational capacity, and transform from a solo consultant into a national platform. You would move from working with 10 clients to working with hundreds, from generating $2 million annually to generating $20 million within 3 years. My breath caught. $8 million. Series of funding. A valuation that suggested Jennifer Wu saw my business not as a small consulting practice, but as something with the potential to become a major player in an industry dominated by firms that charged enormous fees for transformation that often failed to materialize. Why are you offering this tonight? I asked. Why not schedule a formal pitch meeting, conduct more due diligence, follow the typical process? Jennifer's smile was thin and sharp. Because what I witnessed in that ballroom told me something the numbers alone could not reveal. I saw a woman maintaining perfect composure, while her husband publicly diminished work she has built with exceptional skill and strategic thinking. I saw someone who chose dignity over confrontation, who walked away rather than creating a scene, who prioritized long-term positioning over short-term vindication. Those qualities matter as much as revenue metrics when evaluating founders. She pulled a business card from her bag and placed it on the table between us. My offer stands through the end of this week. If you want to accept it, we can begin due diligence immediately and close within 60 days. If you decide you prefer to continue building slowly on your own terms, I respect that choice. But either way, I want you to know that what you have created deserves to be recognized as exactly what it is: a genuinely innovative business with massive growth potential. Jennifer stood, smoothing her dress with efficient movements. One more thing, Miss Castellan. Your husband's financial support was not the reason your business succeeded. Your clients do not work with you because your husband funded your office space. They work with you because you transform their operations in ways that large consulting firms cannot or will not do. Whatever you decide about my offer, do not allow his narrative to become your understanding of your own achievement. She walked away, leaving me alone in the quiet corner of the lobby with her business card, and the weight of her words settling into clarity. $8 million. A valuation that suggested my business was worth far more than Marcus's characterization of an expensive hobby. Recognition from one of the most selective venture capital firms in the region that what I had built in 18 months while operating in the margins of my husband's shadow was genuinely exceptional. I sat in that leather chair for 20 minutes, staring at Jennifer Wu's business card and thinking about the past 10 years of my life. I had met Marcus when I was 26. Working as a management consultant at a large firm where I was slowly learning that my ideas were consistently attributed to senior partners, where my client relationships were leveraged for others' advancement, and where the path to leadership required either exceptional political skill or willingness to subordinate my own judgment to organizational consensus. Marcus had been charismatic and ambitious and absolutely certain that he would build something significant. When he asked me to marry him, he had promised partnership. He had told me that we would build our lives together, that my talents and his would combine into something neither could achieve alone. For the first few years, I had believed that narrative. I had left my consulting position to focus on supporting his company during its critical growth phase. I had hosted dinners that became deal-closing opportunities. I had built relationships with spouses of investors and developers that opened doors Marcus could not have accessed on his own. I had managed every aspect of our household, so that he could work 70-hour weeks without worrying about whether bills were paid or social obligations were met. And I had told myself that this was temporary, that once Castellan Properties was established, there would be space for my own ambitions. But established kept moving further away. Every milestone Marcus achieved created new opportunities that demanded more time, more focus, more sacrifice of anything that might distract from growing his empire. My occasional mentions of returning to work or starting my own venture were met with encouragement that felt increasingly hollow. Of course I should pursue my interests. Of course my talents deserved an outlet. Of course he would support whatever I wanted to explore, as long as it did not interfere with the primary mission of building his company into something truly significant. 18 months ago, I had stopped asking for permission and simply started a small office in one of Marcus's buildings that he barely noticed among hundreds of commercial tenants. A consulting practice focused on small and mid-sized businesses that needed operational transformation, but could not afford the traditional firms charging enormous fees for services that often failed to deliver meaningful change. I had built methodologies that delivered results efficiently, systems that allowed me to work with multiple clients simultaneously, and a reputation that generated referrals faster than I could accommodate new engagements. Marcus had noticed my work only peripherally, asking occasional questions about whether my consulting venture was going well, offering to make introductions if I needed clients, suggesting that perhaps once I had gotten the entrepreneurial impulse out of my system I would be ready to focus on starting a family. He had framed his financial support as generosity, rather than recognizing that the office space and seed capital he provided were a fraction of what I had contributed to building Castellan Properties through years of unpaid strategic partnership. I stood up from the leather chair, smoothed my gown, and walked toward the ballroom entrance. Through the elegant doors, I could see the party continuing. Marcus was at table 12 laughing with a group of developers. People were dancing. The celebration of our 10th anniversary was proceeding exactly as planned, with the minor exception that the woman being celebrated had walked out and was not returning. I did not go back inside. Instead, I walked through the lobby toward the main entrance, handed my valet ticket to the attendant, and stood beneath the elegant awning while my car was retrieved. The Chicago night was cool and clear, the city lights creating a glow against the darkness. I held Jennifer Wu's business card in one hand and my clutch purse in the other, and I thought about what came next. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Where are you? People are asking about you." I did not respond. The valet arrived with my car, a modest sedan that Marcus had occasionally suggested I upgrade to something more befitting the wife of a successful developer. I tipped the attendant, slid into the driver's seat, and sat in silence for a long moment before starting the engine. $8 million in series of funding. Recognition that what I had built in 18 months was not a hobby, but a genuinely innovative business with massive growth potential. The opportunity to transform from a solo consultant operating in the margins of my husband's empire into the founder of a national platform that could compete with the largest firms in the industry. I drove away from the Meridian Grand Hotel, away from the anniversary gala, away from the celebration of a marriage that had been publicly redefined as a relationship where one partner built empires while the other played at entrepreneurship with indulgent financial support. I drove toward my small office in Marcus's building, the space he barely noticed, where I had been building something he had fundamentally failed to understand. When I arrived, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The office was dark and quiet, lit only by the glow of my screen and the city lights filtering through the windows. I pulled up my client list, my revenue projections, my operational systems, all the work that Marcus had characterized as a well-funded hobby. I looked at 18 months of building something from nothing while operating in whatever time and space I could carve from a life defined by someone else's ambitions. Then I opened a new email and began typing. "Jennifer, thank you for your offer, and for recognizing what I have been building. I would like to accept your series A proposal. Please send the term sheet and due diligence requirements. I am ready to move forward immediately. Regards, Claire." I hit send before I could second-guess the decision. The email disappeared into the digital void, carrying with it a choice that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my life. I sat in the darkness of my office and waited for the fear or doubt or uncertainty that should accompany such a dramatic decision. Instead, I felt only clarity and relief and the first genuine sense of agency I had experienced in a decade. I was no longer playing entrepreneur on my husband's indulgent funding. I was building an empire that would stand independent of his support, his network, and his fundamental failure to recognize what I had created. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. Claire, where did you go? This is our anniversary. People are worried. I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet office, surrounded by evidence of work that my husband had never truly seen, and began planning what came next. Jennifer Wu's offer was the beginning, not the end. Accepting venture capital meant building something far larger than a consulting practice that generated comfortable income. It meant hiring a team, scaling operations, expanding into new markets, and transforming from a solo consultant into the founder of a national platform. It meant building something that would force Marcus to finally understand that his wife had never been playing at entrepreneurship. She had been preparing to compete at a level he had never imagined possible. The city lights glowed through my office windows, Chicago spreading out in all directions like a map of possibility. Somewhere in that city, Marcus was probably calling my phone, wondering where I had gone, perhaps finally beginning to suspect that his anniversary tribute had not landed the way he had intended. Somewhere else, Jennifer Wu was probably receiving my acceptance email and beginning the process that would transform my small consulting practice into something genuinely formidable. And here, in this modest office that Marcus had dismissed as the location of my expensive hobby, I sat in darkness planning the architecture of an empire that would be entirely mine, built on my strategies, scaled through my systems, and recognized for what it actually was rather than what someone else assumed it must be. I did not know yet how Marcus would respond when he realized what I was building. I did not know how our marriage would survive the fundamental shift in power dynamics that was about to occur. I did not know whether the wife who had spent a decade supporting someone else's ambitions could successfully transform into the founder who built her own empire. But I knew that I would never again allow anyone to characterize my work as a well-funded hobby. I knew that I would never again subordinate my ambitions to someone else's timeline. And I knew that whatever came next, I would face it as the architect of my own professional destiny, rather than as the supportive spouse watching from the margins. The night stretched ahead, full of decisions that could not be unmade and consequences that could not be avoided. I opened my laptop again and began documenting everything I would need to do in the next 60 days to prepare for Jennifer Wu's due diligence process, and to transform from solo consultant into venture-backed founder. The work ahead would be brutal and demanding and far more challenging than anything I had attempted while operating in the comfortable safety of Marcus's financial support. But for the first time in a decade, the work would be entirely mine. The success or failure would be my own. The empire I built would bear my name and reflect my vision and stand as proof that what my husband had dismissed as playing entrepreneur was actually the foundation of something he had never possessed the imagination to create. I typed until dawn began lightening the sky outside my windows, building plans and strategies and projections for a business that would transform from a modest consulting practice into a national platform. And as the city woke around me, I felt something I had not experienced in years. The absolute certainty that I was finally building the life I was meant to live, on terms I had chosen myself, without asking anyone's permission or accepting anyone's diminishing characterization of my ambitions. Marcus had given me a gift tonight, though not the one he had intended. His public dismissal of my work had clarified something I had been avoiding acknowledging. I had been playing small, building carefully within the boundaries of what seemed safe and manageable, never pushing too hard or demanding too much recognition because some part of me still believed the narrative that my time would come later, after his empire was secure. But there was no later. There was only now, this moment, this choice, this opportunity to step fully into the architect role I had been preparing for without consciously recognizing it. Jennifer Wu had seen what Marcus could not. That 18 months of building in the margins had created something with the potential to become genuinely significant. That my methodologies and systems and client relationships represented not a hobby, but a genuinely innovative approach to an industry that badly needed transformation. The sun rose over Chicago, light spreading across the city like a promise. I saved my documents, closed my laptop, and walked to the window. Below me, the city was beginning its morning rhythm. People heading to work, building businesses, pursuing ambitions, making the thousand small decisions that collectively determined the shape of their lives. I had made my decision. I had accepted Jennifer Wu's offer. I had chosen to build an empire that would be entirely mine, rather than continuing to play a supporting role in someone else's story. What came next would be difficult and uncertain, and potentially devastating to a marriage that had been built on assumptions that no longer held. But for the first time in a decade, I was not asking permission. I was not waiting for the right timing. I was not accepting someone else's characterization of what my work represented, or what my ambitions should be. I was simply building on my own terms with my own vision, toward a future that I would create rather than one that would be granted to me as a gift from someone who believed he was being generous in funding my expensive education and business realities. Marcus would learn soon enough that his wife had never needed an education in business realities. She had been creating them herself, quietly and efficiently, while he was too focused on his own empire to notice that she was building one of her own. I did not return to the penthouse that night. Instead, I checked into the Whitmore Hotel, a boutique property in the West Loop where I had hosted several client meetings over the past year. The night manager recognized me and upgraded my room without comment, perhaps sensing that a woman arriving alone at 5 in the morning in an evening gown was experiencing some kind of personal crisis that deserved discretion rather than questions. The room was elegant and impersonal, decorated in shades of cream and gray that felt appropriately neutral for someone whose entire life had just fractured into before and after. I stripped off the midnight blue gown that had cost more than my first month of consulting revenue, hung it carefully in the closet, and stood under a shower hot enough to turn my skin pink. The water ran over me while I tried to process the magnitude of what I had just done. I had accepted $8 million in venture capital funding. I had walked out of my anniversary gala without explanation or apology. I had spent 6 hours planning the transformation of my small consulting practice into a national platform. And I had not answered a single one of the 17 calls and 23 text messages that had accumulated on my phone from Marcus, each one progressing from confused to concerned to irritated to genuinely worried. When I finally emerged from the shower and checked my messages, the progression was almost comical in its predictability. The early texts were casual inquiries about where I had gone. The middle messages expressed confusion about why I was not responding. The later texts revealed genuine concern that something might have happened to me. And the final message, sent at 4:30 in the morning, carried an edge of anger barely contained beneath a veneer of worry. Claire, I do not know what happened tonight or why you disappeared. But this is completely unacceptable. I have been calling you for hours. People at the gala were asking questions I could not answer. You embarrassed me in front of clients and investors by walking out without explanation. Whatever you are upset about, we can discuss it like adults when you decide to come home. But this silent treatment is childish and beneath you. I read the message 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of what Marcus actually believed had occurred. He thought I had walked out because I was upset. He thought my silence was punishment designed to make him worry. He thought this was a marital dispute that would be resolved through discussion and apology, and a return to normalcy. He had absolutely no comprehension that I had not walked out in anger but in clarity, that my silence was not punishment but the beginning of fundamental separation, and that there would be no return to normalcy because the normal we had built together no longer existed. I turned off my phone without responding and lay on the hotel bed watching dawn light gradually illuminate the room. My body was exhausted but my mind would not stop racing through scenarios and possibilities and calculations. Jennifer Wu's due diligence process would take approximately 60 days, which meant I had 2 months to prepare my business for the kind of scrutiny that would expose every weakness and gap in my operational systems. I would need to formalize processes that currently existed primarily in my head. I would need to document methodologies I had developed through trial and refinement. I would need to create financial projections that accounted for the kind of scaling that venture capital funding would enable. And I would need to do all of this while managing whatever response Marcus would have when he finally understood that his wife had not disappeared in a fit of emotional upset, but had deliberately chosen to build something independent of his support and separate from his influence. I slept for 3 hours, woke at 10 in the morning, and ordered room service coffee and breakfast. While I ate, I created a detailed task list for the next 60 days. The list filled 4 pages and included everything from hiring an attorney to review Jennifer Wu's term sheet to documenting my client transformation methodologies to identifying the first 3 key hires I would need to make once funding closed. Each task was broken down into concrete steps with specific deadlines. The act of organizing chaos into structured action calmed something inside me that had been vibrating with anxious energy since I walked out of the Meridian Grand Hotel. At 11, I turned my phone back on and immediately regretted it. 42 new messages, most from Marcus but several from friends who had attended the gala and were checking whether I was all right. I ignored all of them and called Jennifer Wu's direct number, which she had included in her final text message the previous night. She answered on the second ring. Claire, I was hoping to hear from you this morning. I received your acceptance email. Are you certain about moving forward? Completely certain, I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. What are the next steps? I will send you our standard term sheet by end of business today. You should have your attorney review it, though I can tell you that our terms are favorable compared to industry standards. We take a 22% equity stake in exchange for the $8 million, with standard protective provisions and a board seat. Once you accept the term sheet, we begin due diligence, which typically takes 45 to 60 days. During that time, we will review your financials, operational systems, client contracts, and growth projections in detail. Jennifer paused, and I could hear the sound of typing in the background. I should also tell you that our due diligence process is thorough to the point of being invasive. We will examine every aspect of your business, including its financial separation from your husband's company. If there are any structural entanglements that complicate your business's independence, we need to know about them now, rather than discovering them during due diligence. The question she was really asking was clear. How much of my business depended on Marcus's infrastructure, capital, or connections? How much of what I had built would survive if I removed all support from Castellan Properties? My business is completely separate, I said, running through the mental accounting I had done dozens of times over the past 18 months. I lease office space from one of Marcus's buildings, but I pay market rate rent through a standard commercial lease. The initial seed capital he provided was $50,000 18 months ago, which I have since repaid through a personal loan payment plan. I use none of his staff, none of his systems, and none of his client relationships. Every engagement I have secured came through my own marketing, referrals from satisfied clients, or industry connections I developed independently. Excellent, Jennifer said, and I could hear approval in her voice. That makes our due diligence much simpler. I will need you to document the seed capital repayment and provide copies of your lease agreement, but if what you are describing is accurate, we should have no issues establishing clear separation. We discussed logistics for another 20 minutes before ending the call with an agreement that I would review and return the term sheet within 3 business days. When I hung up, I felt simultaneously energized and terrified. This was actually happening. I was actually accepting venture capital funding, actually committing to transform my small consulting practice into something that would require me to hire staff and scale operations, and compete with firms that had decades of market presence and millions in established revenue. The enormity of what I had committed to settled over me like physical weight. For 18 months, I had been building carefully within comfortable boundaries, taking only as many clients as I could serve excellently, while maintaining the flexibility to manage Marcus's household and support his business development. The work had been challenging but contained, successful but deliberately limited in scope. What Jennifer Wu was offering would eliminate all those comfortable boundaries. Venture capital funding came with expectations of aggressive growth, rapid scaling, and returns that justified the risk of investment. I would need to hire quickly, delegate extensively, and trust that the methodologies I had developed for my own client work could be taught to others and replicated at scale. I would need to transform from a solo practitioner who controlled every aspect of client relationships into a founder who built systems that functioned without her direct involvement. I spent the afternoon in the hotel room working through financial projections and organizational structures. By 6 in the evening, I had drafted a rough hiring plan that identified the first 10 positions I would need to fill, a client acquisition strategy that would double my engagement capacity within 6 months, and a revenue projection that showed a credible path from $2 million annually to $20 million within 3 years. The numbers felt simultaneously ambitious and achievable, aspirational and grounded in the actual metrics my business had generated over the past 18 months. My phone rang at 7. Marcus's number. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. Claire, where the hell are you? His voice carried an edge I had rarely heard directed at me. I have been trying to reach you for nearly 24 hours. I came home this morning and you were not there. Your things are still in the apartment, but you clearly spent the night somewhere else. What is going on? I am at a hotel, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I needed some space to think. Space to think about what? About why you walked out of our anniversary gala without explanation. About why you have been ignoring my calls. Claire, I do not understand what I did to deserve this reaction. If you were upset about something in my speech, we could have discussed it like adults instead of you disappearing and leaving me to make excuses to everyone who attended. The complete lack of self-awareness in his words was almost impressive. Marcus genuinely believed that my walking out was an overreaction to some minor element of his speech that I had misinterpreted. He had no conception that his public characterization of my work as a well-funded hobby had been devastating rather than supportive, dismissive rather than acknowledging. Marcus, I need you to think very carefully about what you said in that speech, I said, choosing my words with precision. You described my business as playing entrepreneur. You characterized it as a hobby that costs you more than it generates. You positioned yourself as the benevolent patron funding my expensive education in business realities. In front of 200 people whose opinions matter in Chicago's business community, you publicly defined my work as an amateur venture that exists only because of your indulgent financial support. Silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him processing my words, trying to understand how his intended compliment had been received as criticism. That is not what I meant, he finally said, his voice defensive. I was trying to acknowledge your work publicly, to show everyone that I support what you are building even though it is still relatively small. I thought I was being generous. You were being condescending, I said, my voice remaining steady despite the anger rising in my chest. You reduced 10 years of supporting your empire and 18 months of building my own business to an expensive hobby that you fund out of marital obligation. You made it clear to everyone in that room that you view my professional work as subordinate to yours, as something I am exploring while you manage the serious business of actual wealth creation. Claire, you are overreacting, Marcus said, his tone shifting to the patient reasonableness he used when he thought I was being emotional rather than rational. Your business generates supplementary income. That is just factual description, not judgment. My company generates $200 million annually. The scale difference is enormous. I was simply being honest about that reality. My business generated $2.3 million in revenue over the past 18 months, I said, pulling up the analysis Jennifer Wu had shown me on my laptop. That is not supplementary income. That is a genuinely successful consulting practice that I built while operating in whatever time I could carve from managing your household and supporting your business development. And yesterday, I received a series of funding offer for $8 million from Apex Ventures, one of the most selective venture capital firms in the Midwest. They believe my business has the potential to scale to $20 million annually within 3 years. So no, Marcus, I was not overreacting to your characterization. I was walking away from a narrative that fundamentally misrepresented what I have actually built. The silence that followed was longer this time. I could hear Marcus breathing, could imagine him sitting in our penthouse trying to reconcile what I had just told him with his understanding of my consulting practice as a small side venture that kept me occupied. You received a venture capital offer? He finally said, his voice carrying confusion rather than congratulation. For your consulting business? Claire, venture capital firms invest in technology companies and scalable platforms, not solo consulting practices. Are you certain this offer is legitimate? The question revealed everything about how Marcus actually viewed my work. Even presented with concrete evidence that serious investors believed my business had significant potential, his first response was skepticism that the offer could be real rather than recognition that he might have fundamentally misunderstood what I had been building. The offer is completely legitimate, I said. Jennifer Wu from Apex Ventures has been tracking my business for months. She attended our anniversary gala specifically to observe the ecosystem and make connections. When she heard your speech characterizing my work as a well-funded hobby, she pulled me aside and made her offer. She has seen my financial metrics, my client retention rates, my operational methodologies, and my growth trajectory. She believes I have built something genuinely innovative that deserves substantial investment. Jennifer Wu was at our gala? Marcus's voice had shifted again, now carrying calculation rather than confusion. Apex Ventures is extremely selective. If they are interested in your business, that suggests you have been operating at a level I did not fully appreciate. The understatement was remarkable. Marcus was beginning to understand that his wife had not been playing at entrepreneurship, but building something substantial enough to attract serious institutional investment. But his framing remained centered on his own failure to appreciate rather than my achievement in creating. I am accepting the offer, I said, cutting through his processing. I will be signing the term sheet this week and beginning due diligence. Over the next 60 days, I will be preparing my business for the kind of scaling that venture capital enables. I will be hiring a team, expanding operations, and transforming from a solo consultant into the founder of a national consulting platform. This will require my complete focus and substantial time commitment. Another long pause. What does that mean for us? Marcus asked, and for the first time his voice carried uncertainty rather than confidence. For our marriage? I do not know yet, I admitted, the honesty feeling both vulnerable and necessary. What I do know is that I cannot continue being the supportive spouse who subordinates her ambitions to your timeline, while you characterize her work as an expensive hobby. I have been building toward this moment for 18 months, and I will not allow your lack of vision or understanding to slow down what comes next. Claire, I support your ambitions, Marcus said, his tone shifting to conciliatory. If this venture capital offer is legitimate, and you want to pursue it, I am behind you completely. We can figure out how to balance your business growth with our life together. This does not need to be adversarial. But it was already adversarial, I thought. The moment Marcus stood on that platform and publicly characterized my work as playing entrepreneur, he had created an adversarial dynamic. The question now was whether we could rebuild our relationship on a foundation of actual equality, rather than the patron-dependent structure that had defined the past decade, or whether the marriage itself was incompatible with both of us operating as peers rather than primary and supporting players. I need time, I said. Time to work through what accepting this funding means. Time to prepare for due diligence. Time to figure out who I am as a founder rather than as your wife. I will continue staying at the hotel for now. We can talk again once I have more clarity. How long is for now? Marcus asked, and I could hear frustration beneath the question. I do not know. Weeks, possibly longer. I will keep you informed, but I need you to give me space to do this without pressure or expectation that I will return to how things were before. We ended the call without resolution, both of us recognizing that this conversation was only the beginning of a much longer negotiation about what our relationship would look like if I chose to remain in it at all. I sat in the hotel room afterward feeling simultaneously relieved and unsettled. Marcus had at least heard what I was saying, even if he did not fully comprehend the implications. He understood that I had received significant investment interest and that I was serious about pursuing it. Whether he understood that this investment would fundamentally transform our power dynamic remained unclear. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived at the Whitmore Hotel while preparing for Jennifer Wu's due diligence process. I hired an attorney who specialized in venture capital transactions to review the term sheet. I worked with my accountant to organize 18 months of financial records into formats that would satisfy institutional investor scrutiny. I documented every client engagement, every operational process, every methodology I had developed through months of trial and refinement. The work was exhausting and all-consuming, requiring 16-hour days and complete focus that left no energy for anything beyond the immediate demands of preparation. Marcus and I spoke 3 times during those weeks, awkward conversations where we attempted to maintain some connection while acknowledging that fundamental aspects of our relationship were being renegotiated in real time. He asked questions about my business that revealed he was finally paying attention to details he had previously ignored. He offered support in forms I no longer needed, connections to potential clients I had already secured independently, advice about scaling that came from his real estate experience, but had limited applicability to consulting services. The conversations were civil and careful, and completely devoid of the easy intimacy we had once shared. On the 20th day after the gala, Jennifer Wu's team arrived at my office to begin formal due diligence. 3 analysts spent a week reviewing my financial records, operational systems, client contracts, and growth projections with the kind of thorough attention that revealed every gap in my preparation. They identified weaknesses I had not recognized, asked questions I had not anticipated, and pushed me to articulate aspects of my business that I had developed intuitively rather than systematically. The process was brutal and clarifying. Every conversation forced me to examine my own assumptions about what I had built and whether it could actually scale in the ways Jennifer Wu envisioned. The analysts questioned my pricing model, my client acquisition strategy, my operational efficiency metrics, and my plans for delegation and team development. They challenged projections that I thought were conservative and identified risks I had not adequately considered. By the end of the week, I had a much clearer understanding both of my business's genuine strengths and of the substantial work required to transform it into something that could justify $8 million in investment. On the final day of their initial visit, Jennifer Wu herself came to my office for a 3-hour conversation that felt less like due diligence and more like strategic planning. We sat across from each other at my small conference table, while she walked through her team's findings and her own assessment of what came next. Your operational fundamentals are stronger than most founders we see at this stage, Jennifer began, opening her tablet to display a detailed analysis her team had compiled. Your client retention rate of 87% is exceptional. Your average contract value growth of 40% quarter-over-quarter indicates you are successfully moving upmarket. Your profit margins of 32% demonstrate operational efficiency that most consulting firms never achieve. These are genuinely impressive metrics. She swiped to a new screen showing areas of concern. However, you have built a business that is entirely dependent on your personal involvement. Every client relationship runs through you. Every methodology exists primarily in your head rather than in documented systems that others could implement. Your pricing is based on what you personally can deliver rather than what a team could accomplish collectively. This creates a ceiling on your growth that no amount of capital can overcome unless you fundamentally restructure how you operate. I nodded, having anticipated this assessment from the analyst's questions throughout the week. I understand that I need to transition from solo practitioner to founder who builds systems. What does that transition actually look like? It looks like hiring your first 3 team members within 60 days of funding close, Jennifer said, her tone becoming more directive. A senior consultant who can take over client relationships you have already established, allowing you to focus on business development and methodology documentation. An operations manager who can build the systems and processes that will allow you to scale beyond your personal capacity. And an analyst who can support both the senior consultant and operations manager while learning your methodologies. She pulled up another document showing a detailed hiring plan. Within 6 months, you should have a team of 10 people. Within 12 months, 20 people. This kind of rapid hiring requires exceptional management discipline and clear organizational systems. Most founders fail at this stage not because their business model is wrong but because they cannot transition from doing the work themselves to managing people who do the work. You will need to develop leadership capabilities very quickly. The challenge was clear and daunting. I had spent 18 months building a successful solo practice. Now I would need to learn how to be a CEO, how to hire and manage and delegate and hold people accountable, how to document intuitive knowledge in ways that others could replicate, how to maintain quality while expanding capacity. The skills required were completely different from the skills that had made me successful as a consultant. I am not certain I know how to do that, I admitted, the vulnerability feeling risky but necessary. I have never managed a team. I have never built organizational systems. I have operated alone by choice because it gave me control over quality and client experience. Learning to let go of that control feels terrifying. Jennifer's expression softened slightly. That fear is normal and healthy. Founders who are not afraid of rapid scaling usually fail because they underestimate the difficulty. What I need to know is whether you are willing to learn these skills quickly, to make mistakes and adapt, to accept coaching and feedback, and to prioritize building a sustainable organization over maintaining personal control of every detail. Yes, I said, the certainty surprising me with its immediacy. I am willing to learn. I am willing to make mistakes. I am willing to accept that building something truly significant requires becoming someone different than who I have been. Good, Jennifer said, closing her tablet, because what we are attempting here is genuinely difficult. We are trying to transform a successful solo practice into a national platform in a compressed time frame that will test every assumption you have about your own capabilities and limitations. There will be moments when you question whether you made the right decision, when the demands feel overwhelming, when you wonder whether you should have continued building slowly on your own terms. She leaned forward, her intensity filling the small office. But if you can navigate this transition successfully, you will have built something that transforms how small and mid-sized businesses access strategic consulting. You will have created a platform that makes sophisticated operational transformation available to companies that have been priced out of traditional consulting services. That is a genuinely worthwhile mission, and it is worth the difficulty required to achieve it. We spent the remaining 2 hours of our meeting working through specific tactical questions about hiring, systems development, and operational scaling. By the time Jennifer left, I had a detailed roadmap for the next 6 months and a much clearer understanding of the magnitude of the challenge I had accepted. This was not going to be a gentle evolution from solo consultant to small team leader. This was going to be a rapid transformation that would require me to develop entirely new capabilities while simultaneously maintaining the client relationships and operational excellence that had attracted investment in the first place. That evening, I sat in my hotel room reviewing the notes from my conversation with Jennifer and feeling the weight of commitment settling into reality. I had 40 days until funding closed, at which point everything would accelerate beyond the careful pace I had maintained for 18 months. I would need to hire 3 people immediately, which meant creating job descriptions, conducting interviews, and making hiring decisions with limited time for deliberation. I would need to document methodologies I had developed intuitively, translating personal expertise into teachable frameworks. I would need to establish organizational systems for project management, client relationship tracking, and quality control that could function without my direct oversight. The enormity of the task ahead felt both exhilarating and paralyzing. For 18 months, I had been building something contained and manageable, successful within deliberate limitations. What came next would have no such limitations. Success would require me to grow as rapidly as my business, to develop leadership capabilities I had never needed, to trust people I had not yet met, to maintain the quality standards I had established personally. My phone rang. Marcus. We had not spoken in 5 days, our longest period of silence in 10 years of marriage. Claire, we need to talk, he said without preamble. In person, not on the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow for dinner? I hesitated, uncertain whether I had the emotional capacity for a serious conversation with Marcus, while processing everything Jennifer Wu had laid out about the challenges ahead. But avoiding the conversation would only delay the inevitable reckoning about what our marriage would look like in this new reality where I was building something separate from and potentially competitive with his own empire. Tomorrow evening, I agreed. 7 o'clock at Merchants. We can talk then. The restaurant was neutral territory, a place we had been together dozens of times but that belonged to neither of us personally. When I arrived the next evening, Marcus was already seated at a corner table away from the main dining area. He stood when he saw me, and for a moment we both seemed uncertain whether to hug or shake hands or simply sit down. We settled for awkward air kisses near each cheek before taking our seats across from each other. You look different, Marcus said, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. More focused, maybe. Or more intense. I have been working 16-hour days preparing for due diligence, I said. Jennifer Wu's team spent last week examining every aspect of my business. They identified weaknesses I need to address and capabilities I need to develop. The process has been clarifying. Are you still moving forward with accepting their investment? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Yes. We are 40 days from funding close. Once that happens, I will be hiring a team and scaling operations rapidly. The next 6 months are going to be extremely demanding. Marcus nodded slowly, processing this information. I have been thinking about what you said during our last conversation, about how my speech at the gala characterized your work in ways you found dismissive. I want you to know that was never my intention. I genuinely thought I was being supportive by acknowledging your business publicly. I know you thought that, I said, keeping my voice level. That is part of the problem. You have never actually understood what I have been building because you have never paid close enough attention to see it clearly. You assumed my consulting practice was a small side venture because that fit your existing understanding of our relationship. You never questioned that assumption even when evidence suggested otherwise. You are right, Marcus admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. I made assumptions based on how I understood our life together rather than actually examining what you were accomplishing. That was a failure on my part, and I apologize for it. The apology landed with complicated weight. I believed Marcus was sincere in recognizing his failure to see my work clearly. But sincerity did not change the fundamental dynamic that had allowed that failure to persist for 18 months. He had been comfortable operating from assumptions because those assumptions positioned him as the primary builder while I remained in a supporting role. Examining those assumptions would have required acknowledging that our relationship was less equal than he preferred to believe. I appreciate the apology, I said. But recognizing the problem does not solve it. The question now is whether our marriage can function when we are both building significant businesses, when we are operating as peers rather than in the patron-dependent structure that has defined the past decade. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. I want to believe it can. But I will be honest with you, Claire. The idea of you building a business that might become as significant as mine, or potentially more significant, challenges assumptions I did not know I had made about our relationship. I thought I was comfortable with you pursuing your own ambitions, but I am discovering that I was only comfortable as long as those ambitions remained safely subordinate to mine. The honesty was startling and painful, and somehow respectful in its directness. Marcus was acknowledging something many men in his position would never admit, that his support for my career had always been conditional on it not threatening his position as the primary breadwinner and builder of our shared life. What do you want me to do with that information? I asked. Should I limit my ambitions to make you more comfortable? Should I turn down $8 million in funding because accepting it might challenge your assumptions about our relationship? No, Marcus said immediately. I do not want you to limit yourself. I am just being honest that I do not know how to navigate what comes next. I do not know how to be married to someone whose business success might exceed my own. I do not know how to share the spotlight when I have spent 15 years building a company that was always the center of our shared life. We ordered dinner and spent the next 2 hours in conversation that was more honest than anything we had shared in years. Marcus asked questions about my business that revealed he was finally trying to understand what I had built, rather than fitting it into his existing assumptions. He acknowledged ways his success had depended on my unpaid support and strategic partnership over the past decade. He admitted fears about what happened to our relationship if we were no longer operating from the clear dynamic of his business as primary and mine as supportive. By the time we finished eating, we had reached no resolution but had at least established a foundation of honesty about what we were both facing. Marcus wanted our marriage to survive, but was not certain he could adapt to the fundamental shift in power dynamics that my business success would create. I wanted to believe our relationship could evolve, but was not willing to subordinate my ambitions to preserve his comfort. We left the restaurant with an agreement to continue these conversations while acknowledging that neither of us knew yet whether our marriage would survive what came next. As I drove back to the Whitmore Hotel, I felt a strange combination of sadness and relief. Sad that 10 years of marriage might be ending because my husband could not adapt to relating to me as an equal. Relieved that we were at least being honest about the challenge rather than pretending it could be easily resolved. The next 40 days passed in a blur of activity that left no space for dwelling on my relationship uncertainty. I finalized the term sheet with Jennifer Wu. I hired my first 3 team members, a process that required me to articulate what I actually did in ways that could be taught to others. I began documenting methodologies that had lived primarily in my intuition and experience. I moved from the Whitmore Hotel into a small furnished apartment in the West Loop that was close to my office and free from the emotional weight of the penthouse I had shared with Marcus. On the day funding officially closed, I stood in my expanded office space, now large enough to accommodate the team I would be building over the next 6 months, and felt the full weight of what I had committed to achieving. $8 million sat in my business bank account. 3 talented people were counting on me to build something that justified their decision to join an unproven platform. Jennifer Wu and Apex Ventures were expecting returns that required me to scale from $2 million annually to $20 million within 3 years. The challenge ahead was enormous and uncertain, and entirely mine to navigate. But for the first time in a decade, I was building something on my own terms with my own vision, toward a future I would create rather than one that would be granted to me as a gift from someone who believed he was being generous. Marcus and I continued our awkward negotiation about what our marriage would become. We met for dinner every week, conversations that were honest and painful and slowly clarifying that the relationship we had built over the past decade was fundamentally incompatible with both of us operating as equals. He wanted me to succeed, but he wanted my success to remain safely smaller than his own. I wanted partnership, but I was no longer willing to accept a version of partnership that required me to play a subordinate role. The empire I was building would stand independent of his support, his network, and his fundamental inability to see me as anything other than the woman who had spent a decade enabling his success. What came next would be determined entirely by my own capabilities, my own strategic choices, and my own willingness to become the kind of leader that venture-backed scaling demanded. And as I looked at my growing team, my expanding client roster, and the roadmap Jennifer Wu had helped me create for the next 3 years, I understood that I was finally becoming the architect of my own professional destiny, rather than the supporting character in someone else's story of success. The first person I hired was Elena Okoye, a senior consultant who had spent 8 years at McKinsey before leaving, because she was exhausted by the firm's obsession with billable hours over actual client impact. I found her through a referral from one of my existing clients who mentioned that his previous consultant had been exceptional, but had left the industry entirely out of frustration with how traditional firms operated. When I reached out to Elena, she was teaching business strategy at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management and consulting occasionally for nonprofits that could not afford McKinsey's rates. We met at a coffee shop near campus on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before funding closed. Elena was in her mid-30s, with close-cropped natural hair and an intensity that reminded me of Jennifer Wu's focused assessment. She had agreed to the meeting out of curiosity more than genuine interest in returning to consulting, and her initial questions made clear that she was evaluating whether I was serious about building something different or simply replicating the exploitative models that dominated the industry. "Why did you leave McKinsey?" I asked after we had exchanged preliminary background information about our respective experiences. Elena's expression hardened slightly. "Because I watched brilliant consultants produce genuinely transformative recommendations that clients never implemented because we had no incentive to ensure execution. We were paid to analyze and advise, not to achieve results. The entire business model was structured around maximizing billable hours, rather than maximizing client success. After 8 years of that, I could not continue participating in a system that extracted enormous fees while delivering minimal lasting value." She leaned forward, her voice becoming more passionate. "I became a consultant because I genuinely believed that good strategic thinking could help organizations become more effective. I wanted to solve problems, not just describe them. But at McKinsey, and at every large consulting firm I have observed, the incentives are completely misaligned with that mission. You make more money when clients struggle because struggling clients need more analysis. You have no motivation to build their internal capacity because capable clients need less consulting. The entire model is predicated on dependency rather than empowerment." I nodded, recognizing in her frustration the same disillusionment I had experienced at my previous firm. What would a better model look like? "A consulting approach that gets paid for results rather than hours," Elena said immediately, as though she had been thinking about this question for years. "A methodology that builds client capacity, rather than maintaining dependency. A business model that succeeds when clients become self-sufficient, rather than when they need ongoing support." But creating that kind of consulting practice requires fundamentally rethinking how the economics work, and most founders are not willing to challenge industry orthodoxy that drastically. I pulled out my laptop and opened the document where I had been articulating my own approach to consulting over the past 18 months. "This is the methodology I have been developing. I charge clients based on defined transformation outcomes rather than hourly rates. I work with them intensively for defined periods, usually 3 to 6 months, with the explicit goal of building their internal systems and capabilities, so they do not need ongoing consulting support. My business model succeeds through referrals from clients who have achieved genuine transformation rather than through long-term dependency relationships." Elena read through the document with increasing focus, occasionally asking questions about specific aspects of implementation or how I measured outcomes. When she finished, she looked up with an expression that combined surprise and cautious optimism. "This is actually different," she said. "Not revolutionary, but genuinely distinct from how most consulting firms operate. You have built something that aligns incentives correctly. The question is whether it can scale beyond your personal capacity to deliver these transformations." "That is exactly the question I need to answer over the next 6 months," I admitted. "I have accepted venture capital funding to attempt scaling this approach from a solo practice to a national platform. I need to hire consultants who can learn these methodologies and deliver the same quality of transformation I have been providing personally. The first hire I make will determine whether this scaling is actually possible or whether what I have built only works because of my specific capabilities and cannot be replicated." Elena studied me for a long moment. "You are asking me to be that first hire, to help you determine whether your approach is genuinely teachable, or whether you have built something that only works when you personally deliver it." "Yes," I said simply. "I am offering you the opportunity to help build a consulting practice that operates according to the principles you articulated about results over hours and empowerment over dependency. But I am being honest that this is an experiment. I do not know yet whether my methodologies can be taught or whether I have simply developed an intuitive approach that works for me but cannot scale beyond my personal involvement." We spent 3 more hours in that coffee shop discussing the details of what I was building, the challenges of rapid scaling, the risks of accepting venture capital, and Elena's own aspirations for what consulting could become if freed from the structural constraints of traditional firm models. By the time we finished, Elena had agreed to join as my first senior consultant with the understanding that her primary responsibility would be learning my methodologies deeply enough to begin taking over client relationships within 90 days. The second person I hired was Marcus Chan, an operations manager who had spent 5 years building internal systems for a rapidly scaling technology company, before burning out on the intensity and looking for something that combined strategic thinking with operational execution. I found Marcus through a recruiting firm that specialized in placing experienced operators into early-stage companies, and his background was exactly what I needed. Someone who understood how to build processes and systems that could support rapid growth without becoming bureaucratic obstacles to getting work done. Marcus was methodical and detail-oriented in ways that complemented my more intuitive approach to client work. During our interview, he asked incisive questions about my current operational systems, identified gaps I had not recognized, and articulated a clear vision for how to structure project management, client relationship tracking, and quality control processes that could function at scale. Within his first week, he had documented every aspect of how I currently operated and identified 12 critical areas where formalization was needed before we could responsibly add more consultants to the team. The third hire was Priya Sharma, a recent MBA graduate from University of Chicago, who had spent the previous summer interning at Boston Consulting Group and had been deeply disappointed by the experience. Priya was brilliant and ambitious and hungry to learn consulting in an environment that prioritized genuine client impact over prestigious firm credentials. She would work as an analyst supporting both Elena and Marcus, while learning the methodologies that would eventually allow her to take on her own client relationships. With these 3 people, I had the foundation of a team that could begin the work of transforming my solo practice into something scalable. But having the people was only the first step. The much harder challenge was teaching them to do what I had been doing intuitively for 18 months, translating personal expertise into systematic approaches that others could replicate. The process of documentation was humbling and exhausting. Elena shadowed me for 2 weeks on existing client engagements, taking detailed notes about how I conducted discovery conversations, how I analyzed operational systems, how I identified leverage points for transformation, and how I built client capacity to sustain changes after my engagement ended. Each evening, we would sit in my office and she would ask questions about why I had made specific choices during that day's client work. Many of my answers began with phrases like, "I just sensed that," or "something felt off about," or "intuitively it seemed like," which Elena would then push me to articulate in more concrete terms. What specifically had I sensed? What data or observations had triggered that feeling? What framework was I unconsciously applying when I claimed to be operating on intuition? The process of making explicit what had been implicit forced me to examine my own thinking in ways I had never done before. After 3 weeks of this intensive shadowing and analysis, Elena presented me with a document that was both flattering and devastating. She had mapped out the core methodology I was using across client engagements, identifying patterns I had not consciously recognized in my own work. The document revealed that I had indeed developed a systematic approach, but it was far more complex and nuanced than I had realized. Teaching someone to replicate it would require months of careful training and supervised practice, not the quick knowledge transfer I had naively imagined. "This is sophisticated work," Elena said when we sat down to review her analysis. "You have developed frameworks for operational assessment, stakeholder analysis, change management, and capacity building that are genuinely innovative. But you are operating at a level of complexity that takes most consultants years to develop. Teaching others to work at this level quickly is going to be extremely difficult." The realization settled over me with uncomfortable weight. I had accepted $8 million in venture capital funding, based on the assumption that my approach could be rapidly scaled through hiring and training. But Elena's analysis suggested that what I did was far harder to replicate than I had understood. The question now was whether we could develop training systems and support structures that would allow new consultants to deliver high-quality work, even before they had developed the intuitive expertise that came from years of practice. Marcus approached the challenge from the operational side, building systems that would provide structure and support for consultants who were still developing their capabilities. He created detailed project templates that broke down each phase of client engagement into specific tasks and deliverables. He built quality control processes that ensured work was reviewed at multiple stages before being delivered to clients. He established clear escalation paths so that junior consultants could access senior support when they encountered challenges beyond their current capabilities. Within 6 weeks of the three of them joining, we had transformed my small office into something that resembled an actual consulting practice rather than a solo operation. The walls were covered with documentation of our methodologies, client engagement processes, and quality standards. The shared calendar was filled with internal training sessions, client meetings, and team coordination time. The project management system Marcus had implemented tracked every active engagement with granular detail about progress, risks, and upcoming milestones. But the real test came when Elena took over her first client relationship entirely, a mid-sized manufacturing company that needed help optimizing their production scheduling and inventory management. I had done the initial discovery work and developed the transformation plan, but Elena would be responsible for implementation and building the client's internal capacity to sustain the changes. For the first time since I had started my consulting practice, I would not be the person directly delivering the transformation. I tried to give Elena space to work independently, while remaining available for questions and support. The balance was difficult to find. I wanted to trust her capability and not micromanage, but I also felt acute anxiety about whether she could maintain the quality standards that had been central to my business's success. Every day, I fought the urge to ask detailed questions about how client conversations had gone or to review her work before she delivered it to the client. Marcus noticed my struggle during one of our weekly team meetings. "You are going to need to develop much higher tolerance for loss of control," he said with characteristic directness. "Right now we have 3 people and you can still maintain oversight of everything. In 6 months we will have 20 people and multiple client engagements running simultaneously. You will not be able to review every deliverable or attend every client meeting. You will need to trust that the systems we are building and the training we are providing will ensure quality without your direct involvement." He was right, but the transition from solo practitioner who controlled every detail to founder who built systems and trusted others to execute was proving far more difficult than I had anticipated. Every instinct I had developed over 18 months of building my practice pushed me toward maintaining direct involvement in client work. Learning to let go of that control required actively fighting against patterns that had made me successful. Elena's first solo client engagement progressed well. She encountered challenges and made mistakes, but she also demonstrated genuine capability to apply the methodologies we had documented and to achieve client transformation without my direct involvement. The manufacturing company reported significant improvements in production efficiency and inventory management within 2 months. More importantly, they reported that Elena had successfully built their internal team's capacity to sustain and continue improving the system she had helped them implement. The success gave me confidence that scaling might actually be possible. If Elena could learn to deliver transformation at the level I had been achieving personally, then other talented consultants could potentially do the same. The question was whether we could develop training and support systems robust enough to maintain quality, while adding new team members rapidly. Jennifer Wu visited our office 6 weeks after funding had closed, bringing with her the same focused intensity one remembered from our early conversations. She spent a full day with our team, observing how we worked together, reviewing the systems Marcus had built, and evaluating whether we were making adequate progress toward the aggressive growth targets that justified Apex Ventures' $8 million investment. At the end of the day, Jennifer and I sat in my office while the rest of the team had gone home. She pulled out her tablet and displayed a dashboard tracking our progress against the milestones we had established during due diligence. "You are behind on hiring," she said without preamble. "We projected you would have 6 team members by this point, but you have only hired 3. At this rate, you will not reach the 20-person team size we targeted for the 12-month mark." I had known this conversation was coming. I deliberately slowed hiring because I needed to ensure our first hires were successful before adding more people. Elena's first solo client engagement is going well, but it took 6 weeks of intensive training and shadowing before she was ready to work independently. If I had hired 6 people simultaneously, I would not have been able to provide that level of training support to multiple new consultants. Jennifer nodded, her expression suggesting she had expected this explanation. "I understand the logic, but you need to recognize that what you are describing is a scaling constraint. If you can only train 1 consultant at a time with 6 weeks of intensive shadowing, you can add approximately 8 new consultants per year. That trajectory will not get you to the team size and revenue targets that make this investment successful." The assessment was accurate and uncomfortable. I had been operating under the assumption that careful sequential hiring was responsible leadership, but Jennifer was pointing out that it was actually a failure to build the kind of training and support systems that would allow us to hire and onboard multiple consultants simultaneously. "What you need," Jennifer continued, "is to separate the training function from your personal involvement. Elena has now successfully completed a solo client engagement using your methodologies. That means she understands the approach well enough to begin training others while you focus on business development and strategic leadership. Marcus has built operational systems that can support multiple simultaneous client engagements. Priya has learned enough to begin taking on more substantive analytical work. You have the foundation of a team that can function with decreasing dependence on your direct involvement. The question is whether you are willing to actually step back and let them operate." She was challenging the same instinct Marcus had identified weeks earlier: my difficulty with releasing control and trusting others to maintain quality without my direct oversight. But Jennifer was framing it not as a personal limitation to overcome gradually, but as a strategic imperative that required immediate action. "I am going to push you to hire 3 more consultants within the next month," Jennifer said. "Not 1 at a time with careful sequential training, but 3 people who join simultaneously and learn from Elena, Marcus, and Priya rather than exclusively from you. This will test whether your team can actually replicate your approach or whether you have simply trained 1 person to work the way you work. It will also force you to develop training systems that can scale beyond your personal involvement." The prospect was terrifying. Adding 3 people simultaneously when we were still figuring out how to function as a team of 4 felt reckless. But Jennifer's logic was sound. If our business model only worked when I personally trained every consultant through intensive shadowing, then we could not scale rapidly enough to justify venture capital investment. We needed to prove that the methodologies could be taught systematically rather than through apprenticeship with me as the master craftsperson. Over the next 4 weeks, I hired 3 additional consultants with varied backgrounds and experience levels. David Tran had spent 6 years at Deloitte working on operational transformation projects, and was looking for a consulting environment less focused on selling additional services to existing clients. Sarah Mitchell was a career transition candidate who had spent 15 years in corporate operations roles and wanted to leverage that experience to help other companies improve their effectiveness. James Bradley was another recent MBA graduate who had been recruited by multiple prestigious consulting firms, but was attracted to our results-focused methodology over the prestigious brand names of traditional firms. The process of integrating 3 new people while still establishing norms and systems with the original team was chaotic in ways I had not fully anticipated. Our small office suddenly felt crowded. Meeting schedules became complex puzzles. The learning curves and training needs varied dramatically across the team, based on their different backgrounds and experience levels. Elena, Marcus, and Priya were simultaneously trying to establish themselves in their roles, while taking on responsibility for training the new hires. I watched Elena conduct training sessions on our discovery methodology, explaining frameworks and approaches she had learned from me just weeks earlier. Her teaching was clear and systematic, but I could see her struggling with some of the same challenges I had faced when trying to make explicit what had become intuitive. The new consultants asked questions she had not anticipated. They applied frameworks in ways that were technically correct but missed important nuances. They needed multiple iterations and feedback cycles before they began to internalize the thinking that Elena had absorbed through intensive shadowing of my actual client work. Marcus built onboarding systems and training protocols that provided more structure to the chaos. Each new consultant received a detailed development plan outlining what they needed to learn and master over their first 90 days. The plan included specific training modules, shadowing opportunities with more experienced team members, supervised practice on low-risk client work, and regular evaluation checkpoints. The structure helped, but it could not eliminate the fundamental challenge that consulting expertise developed through practice and pattern recognition, rather than through studying documented methodologies. By the end of 8 weeks, we had grown from a team of 4 to a team of 7, and the office felt completely different. What had been a small group where everyone knew everything that was happening had transformed into an actual organization that required formal communication systems and coordination mechanisms. Morning stand-up meetings kept everyone aligned on active projects and upcoming milestones. Weekly team meetings provided space for sharing lessons learned and coordinating across client engagements. Monthly retrospectives allowed us to reflect on what was working and what needed adjustment in our operational systems. The growth also revealed gaps in my own capabilities as a leader. I had been an excellent solo consultant, but I had never managed a team of this size or complexity. I was learning in real time how to delegate effectively, how to provide feedback that improved performance without demoralizing people, how to balance individual development needs against organizational efficiency demands, and how to maintain quality standards while allowing people to make mistakes and learn from them. During this period of rapid team building, Marcus and I had minimal direct contact beyond our weekly dinners that had become increasingly strained. He was struggling with his own challenges at Castellan Properties, where a major development project had encountered unexpected regulatory obstacles that threatened both timeline and budget. But more fundamentally, he was struggling with the reality that I was building something substantial and demanding that competed for my attention and emotional energy in ways our marriage had never previously experienced. At one dinner, approximately 3 months after I had walked out of our anniversary gala, Marcus asked a question that had clearly been building for weeks. When you accepted Jennifer Wu's investment, did you consider what it would mean for us? For our marriage? Or were you so focused on your business opportunity that you did not think about the implications for our relationship? The question was fair even if it was painful. I thought about it, I admitted. But I also recognized that if I turned down the opportunity because of what it might mean for our marriage, I would resent you for the rest of my life. I would always wonder what I could have built if I had been brave enough to prioritize my own ambitions over preserving our comfortable dynamic. Marcus stared at his wine glass, his jaw tight. So you chose your business over our marriage? No, I said, my voice firm despite the discomfort. I chose not to subordinate my professional ambitions to your comfort with our existing relationship dynamic. Those are different things. Our marriage can survive and potentially thrive if you are willing to adapt to relating to me as an equal rather than as the supportive spouse whose work remains safely secondary to yours. But if equality feels like abandonment to you, then yes, our marriage probably cannot survive what I am building. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice carrying resignation. I thought I was comfortable with you being successful. I genuinely believed I wanted you to have your own professional achievements. But watching you build something that requires this much of your focus and energy, watching you become someone who does not need my support or input or approval, I am realizing that my comfort was always conditional on you remaining somewhat dependent on me. And I do not know how to let go of that need. The honesty was devastating and clarifying. Marcus was acknowledging something that many successful men never admitted, that their support for their partners' careers was often conditional on those careers remaining subordinate enough to preserve their own sense of primary importance. He wanted me to succeed as long as my success did not threaten his position as the more successful partner. But what I was building would not remain safely smaller than his empire. Within 2 years, my consulting platform might generate more revenue than Castellan Properties. Within 5 years, I might have built something more significant and influential than anything he would achieve in real estate development. I do not need you to have all the answers right now, I said gently. But I do need you to be honest about whether you can adapt to this new reality. Because I am not going to slow down my business growth to make you more comfortable. I am not going to pretend to need your support when I have built systems and capabilities that function independently. I am not going to perform helplessness or dependency to protect your ego. We ended that dinner without resolution, both recognizing that our marriage was approaching a decision point that could not be delayed indefinitely. Either Marcus would find a way to adapt to relating to me as an equal, or our relationship would end because it was fundamentally incompatible with the person I was becoming and the empire I was building. Back at the office, the team was navigating the challenges of multiple simultaneous client engagements, while still developing their consulting capabilities. Elena had taken on a second solo client relationship, this time with less intensive oversight from me. David and Sarah were working together on a mid-sized retail client, learning to collaborate and combine their different backgrounds into complementary strengths. Priya and James were supporting Marcus on systems development and quality control processes that would allow us to maintain standards, as we continued adding more consultants. The progress was uneven and sometimes frustrating, but we were demonstrating that the core methodologies could be taught and replicated beyond my personal delivery. Clients were reporting positive results from work that Elena, David, and Sarah were leading with decreasing involvement from me. The training systems Marcus had built were proving robust enough to onboard new consultants in parallel, rather than requiring sequential individual attention from me personally. 3 months after accepting venture capital funding, we held our first formal quarterly business review with Jennifer Wu and her team from Apex Ventures. I prepared a detailed presentation showing our progress against the milestones we had established during due diligence. The team growth metrics were still behind target but improving. Our revenue was tracking slightly ahead of projections because we had been able to maintain high utilization rates, even while training new consultants. Client satisfaction scores remained at the exceptional levels we had established before scaling. The operational systems were functioning well enough to support continued growth without creating chaos. Jennifer reviewed the data with her characteristic thoroughness, asking detailed questions about specific metrics and challenging optimistic interpretations where she thought we were glossing over problems. At the end of 2 hours, she closed her tablet and looked at me directly. "You have made meaningful progress, but you are still thinking too small," she said. "You have grown from 1 consultant to 7, from 2 million in annual revenue to a trajectory toward 4 million this year. That growth is respectable, but it is not venture scale growth. You need to be thinking about how to get to 50 consultants and 20 million in revenue within 2 years, not how to carefully add a few people each quarter while maintaining perfect quality control." The assessment stung because it was accurate. I had been unconsciously limiting our growth rate to what felt manageable and controlled, avoiding the kind of aggressive scaling that venture capital investment was meant to enable. Jennifer was pushing me to embrace chaos and imperfection in service of speed and scale, to accept that rapid growth would inevitably mean some mistakes and quality issues, rather than the careful perfection I had maintained as a solo consultant. "What you are describing feels reckless," I admitted. "Adding 50 consultants in 2 years means hiring more than 2 people per month consistently. That kind of hiring velocity creates enormous risk of making bad hiring decisions, of bringing people onto the team who do not share our values or understand our methodologies, of compromising the quality standards that have been central to our success." "Yes," Jennifer agreed. "Rapid scaling does create those risks, but not scaling rapidly enough creates the certainty of failure. You took $8 million from institutional investors who expect venture returns. That means growing fast enough to either become a national platform that dominates your market segment or building toward an acquisition by a larger firm that sees value in what you have created. Careful, steady growth will not achieve either outcome. You need to embrace the risks of moving faster." She stood, gathering her materials. "I am not asking you to be reckless. I am asking you to be ambitious at the scale that venture capital enables. Build the training systems and quality controls that allow you to hire aggressively while maintaining standards. Trust your team to handle more responsibility than you are currently comfortable delegating. Focus your own time on business development and strategic partnerships that create client demand at scale rather than on reviewing every deliverable your consultants produce. After Jennifer left, I sat alone in the conference room thinking about the gap between my instinctive comfort level and the aggressive growth she was demanding. Everything in my experience as a consultant pushed me toward careful quality control and manageable complexity. Everything about accepting venture capital required me to embrace chaos and speed in ways that felt fundamentally uncomfortable. But I had chosen this path. I had accepted Jennifer Wu's investment knowing it would require me to build something far larger than what felt naturally comfortable. The question was whether I could develop the capabilities and mindset to lead at the scale she was demanding, or whether I would remain trapped in the careful, controlled approach that had made me successful as a solo consultant but would prevent me from becoming the founder of a genuinely significant platform. That evening, I gathered the team and shared Jennifer's assessment honestly. I told them that we needed to accelerate our hiring dramatically, that we needed to build training and support systems robust enough to onboard multiple people simultaneously, and that we needed to embrace imperfection and learning in service of speed and scale. The team's reactions varied from excitement to anxiety, but everyone recognized that we were at an inflection point that would determine whether we became something genuinely significant or remained a small boutique firm that never achieved the potential that had attracted venture capital investment. Elena volunteered to lead the development of a formal training academy that would allow us to onboard multiple consultants simultaneously, with less dependence on individual shadowing and apprenticeship. Marcus committed to building the operational infrastructure that could support 3 times our current team size. Priya and James began working on recruitment strategies that would allow us to identify and attract talented consultants who would thrive in our methodology-driven approach. Within 2 weeks, we had developed a plan for adding 15 more consultants over the next 6 months. The plan was aggressive and risky and required us to trust systems and structures that were still being built in real time. But it represented the kind of ambition that venture capital investment demanded, and that building a genuinely significant platform required. I looked at the plan we had created, at the team that was willing to embrace this aggressive growth despite the challenges and uncertainties, and felt something shift inside me. I was no longer building carefully within comfortable boundaries. I was attempting something genuinely difficult and uncertain, something that might fail but that was worth attempting because the potential impact justified the risk. Marcus had characterized my business as playing entrepreneur, as an expensive hobby that I was exploring with his indulgent financial support. But what I was actually building was a national consulting platform that could transform how small and mid-sized businesses access strategic expertise. What had started as a way to use my talents in the margins of my husband's empire had become something that demanded every ounce of my capability and pushed me to develop capacities I had never needed before. The empire I was building would stand as proof that what looked like playing to someone who was not paying attention was actually the foundation of something they lacked the imagination to create themselves. And within 2 years, Marcus would understand exactly what he had failed to recognize when he stood on that platform at our anniversary gala and dismissed my work as a well-funded hobby. The training academy that Elena built over the next 6 weeks was far more sophisticated than anything I had imagined when I first suggested we needed formal onboarding systems. She converted one of the conference rooms in our expanded office space into a dedicated learning environment, complete with whiteboards covering every wall, a library of case studies drawn from our actual client engagements, and a structured curriculum that broke down our consulting methodology into teachable modules that new hires could absorb systematically rather than through osmosis and observation. The curriculum Elena designed started with foundational concepts about operational efficiency, stakeholder analysis, and change management theory. From there, it progressed through our specific frameworks for client discovery, problem diagnosis, solution design, and implementation support. Each module included lecture content, case study analysis, role-playing exercises where consultants practiced client conversations, and supervised application on actual client work with extensive feedback and coaching. The entire program was designed to be completed over 8 weeks, with consultants spending roughly half their time in formal training, and the other half applying what they were learning under close supervision. What made Elena's approach genuinely innovative was her recognition that adult learning required multiple modalities and repeated practice rather than one-time instruction. Each concept was introduced through lecture, reinforced through case study analysis, practiced through role-playing, applied on supervised client work, and then revisited in group debriefs where consultants could share what they had learned and what challenges they had encountered. The repetition and varied application helped new consultants internalize frameworks that might otherwise remain abstract theoretical knowledge that they could not translate into effective client work. Marcus built the operational infrastructure to support this training academy and the rapid hiring it would enable. He created detailed role descriptions for different consultant levels, from junior analysts fresh out of graduate programs to senior consultants with a decade of industry experience. He established clear progression pathways showing how consultants could advance through the organization as they developed capabilities and demonstrated results. He built project allocation systems that ensured new consultants received appropriate assignments that matched their current skill level, while providing stretch opportunities that would develop their capabilities. And he created quality control processes that reviewed consultant work at multiple stages without creating bureaucratic bottlenecks that would slow down our ability to deliver results to clients. The systems Marcus built were essential infrastructure that allowed us to scale beyond what any individual could manage through personal oversight. Instead of me reviewing every consultant's work before it went to clients, we had peer review processes where consultants evaluated each other's deliverables against documented quality standards. Instead of me personally assigning consultants to client engagements based on my intuitive sense of fit, we had systematic matching processes that considered consultant capabilities, client needs, development opportunities, and workload balance. Instead of me conducting all performance conversations with team members, we had structured feedback systems where consultants received input from multiple sources including peers, clients, and supervisors. With these systems in place, we launched an aggressive recruiting campaign designed to add 15 consultants over 6 months. The campaign targeted several different talent pools simultaneously. We recruited experienced consultants from traditional firms who were disillusioned with the billable hours model and attracted to our results-focused approach. We recruited corporate executives who wanted to transition into consulting and could bring deep operational expertise from their industry experience. We recruited top MBA graduates who were weighing offers from prestigious firms, but might be convinced to join a smaller platform that offered faster advancement and greater impact. And we recruited career changers from other professional services fields who had transferable skills and were looking for new challenges. The recruiting process itself became a significant operational challenge. Priya took primary responsibility for managing the pipeline, coordinating with recruiters, conducting initial screening conversations, and scheduling candidates for interviews with team members. Each candidate went through multiple interview rounds designed to assess not just their technical capabilities, but also their alignment with our methodology and values. We were looking for people who genuinely cared about client results over personal prestige, who were comfortable with the ambiguity and complexity of real operational transformation, and who could thrive in a rapidly scaling environment where processes and structures were still being built. Over 3 months, we hired 12 consultants, growing our team from 7 to 19. The new hires brought diverse backgrounds and perspectives that enriched our capabilities while also creating integration challenges as we worked to build a cohesive culture across people who had never worked together before. Some transitions were smooth, with new consultants quickly absorbing our methodology and beginning to contribute meaningfully to client engagements. Other transitions were rocky, with consultants struggling to unlearn habits and assumptions from their previous firms or finding that our approach required different skills than what had made them successful in their prior roles. One particularly difficult transition involved a senior consultant named Robert Chambers who had spent 12 years at Bain and came with impressive credentials and client references. Robert was technically brilliant and could analyze complex operational problems with exceptional clarity, but he struggled with the implementation support and capacity-building aspects of our methodology that required working collaboratively with client teams rather than simply delivering expert recommendations. His instinct was to identify the optimal solution and prescribe it with authority, expecting clients to execute based on his analysis. Our approach required consultants to work alongside client teams, building their understanding and capabilities so they could sustain improvements after our engagement ended. The tension came to a head during Robert's second month when a client expressed frustration that he was dismissive of their input and seemed more interested in demonstrating his expertise than in understanding their organizational constraints. Elena and I spent several hours coaching Robert on how our methodology differed from traditional consulting approaches, but he struggled to adapt his style to our more collaborative model. Eventually, we had to acknowledge that Robert's capabilities and approach, while impressive in their own right, were not aligned with the kind of consulting we were building. He left the firm after 3 months to join another traditional consultancy where his expertise-driven approach was better suited to client expectations. The experience with Robert was painful but clarifying. It reinforced that our methodology required specific mindsets and capabilities that were distinct from traditional consulting excellence. We refined our recruiting process to better assess whether candidates could thrive in our collaborative, capacity-building approach, rather than simply evaluating their analytical horsepower and industry experience. Not every talented consultant would succeed in our model, and identifying that fit early in the recruiting process would save everyone the difficulty of failed integrations. The consultants who did successfully integrate into our approach began taking on increasing responsibility for client relationships with decreasing supervision from me. Elena was now managing 3 client engagements completely independently and producing results that matched the quality I had delivered personally. David and Sarah had formed an effective partnership where they combined David's analytical rigor with Sarah's deep operational intuition to deliver transformations that neither could have achieved working alone. The newer consultants were progressing through Elena's training academy and beginning to take on supervised client work that built their capabilities while delivering value to clients. The most significant validation of our scaling approach came from a client engagement that tested whether our methodology could work on a company substantially larger than the mid-sized businesses I had typically served. A regional healthcare system with 17 facilities and 4,000 employees approached us about helping them improve operational efficiency across their network. The project was larger and more complex than anything we had attempted previously, requiring us to coordinate work across multiple locations, engage with diverse stakeholder groups, and navigate the particular regulatory and cultural challenges of healthcare delivery. I assigned Elena to lead the engagement, with David and 2 of our newer consultants supporting her. The decision to have Elena lead rather than taking it on myself was deliberate, a test of whether we had successfully transferred not just our methodology, but also the capability to manage complex client relationships and deliver large-scale transformation. If Elena could successfully lead this healthcare system engagement, it would prove that what we had built could scale beyond my personal involvement. If she struggled or failed, it would suggest that our methodology might work for smaller engagements but could not handle the complexity of truly significant client relationships. For the first month of the engagement, I monitored progress closely through weekly check-ins with Elena and review of key deliverables before they went to the client. Elena demonstrated strong command of our discovery methodology, conducting thorough stakeholder interviews, analyzing operational data, and identifying leverage points for improvement across the healthcare system's network. But I could see her struggling with the political complexity of navigating competing interests among facility directors, clinical staff, and central administration. Healthcare delivery involved dynamics and constraints that were different from the manufacturing and retail clients where she had previously worked, and she needed to adapt our frameworks to account for those differences. During one particularly challenging week, Elena called me at 10 in the evening sounding exhausted and uncertain. The healthcare system's chief operating officer had pushed back aggressively on some of the preliminary recommendations Elena's team had presented, arguing that they did not adequately account for the clinical workflow implications and patient safety considerations that constrained operational changes in healthcare settings. Elena was questioning whether our methodology was appropriate for this type of client or whether she had missed something fundamental in her analysis. I listened to her describe the situation in detail, asking questions to understand both what had happened and what she was feeling. The COO's concerns were legitimate and pointed to an area where Elena's recommendations had indeed been incomplete. Healthcare operations required integration of efficiency considerations with clinical quality and patient safety in ways that manufacturing or retail did not. Elena had focused primarily on the efficiency dimensions because those were most familiar from her previous engagements, but she had not adequately addressed how operational changes would impact clinical workflows and patient care delivery. Rather than telling Elena what to do, I asked her questions that helped her think through how to adapt our methodology to account for healthcare's unique constraints. How could she bring clinical staff more centrally into the solution design process, so that operational improvements were developed with deep understanding of care delivery requirements? What additional data would she need to collect to evaluate whether proposed changes would maintain or improve clinical quality while increasing efficiency? How could she structure the implementation process to include careful monitoring of both operational and clinical metrics, so that any negative impacts on care delivery would be identified and addressed quickly? By the end of our conversation, Elena had developed a plan for how to respond to the COO's concerns and how to adjust her approach to better integrate operational and clinical considerations. More importantly, she had worked through the problem herself, with me serving as a sounding board rather than as the expert who provided answers. That distinction was critical for our scaling strategy to succeed. If consultants could only solve novel problems by escalating them to me for solutions, we would remain constrained by my personal capacity. But if consultants could solve novel problems themselves, with me serving as a coach who helped them think through challenges, our capacity would scale with the size of our team. Elena implemented her adjusted approach over the next month, bringing clinical staff into the design process much more substantively, and ensuring that efficiency improvements were evaluated against quality and safety standards. The healthcare system's leadership responded positively to the revised recommendations, and the implementation began progressing well. 3 months into the engagement, the healthcare system was reporting significant operational improvements with maintained or improved clinical quality metrics. The results validated that our methodology could be successfully adapted to complex organizational contexts beyond the mid-sized businesses where it had been developed. The successful healthcare engagement created important proof points for our scaling strategy. It demonstrated that senior consultants like Elena could successfully lead large complex engagements without my direct involvement. It showed that our methodology was robust enough to be adapted to diverse industry contexts while maintaining its core principles. And it proved to potential clients that we could handle enterprise-scale challenges, opening doors to larger engagements that would accelerate our revenue growth. Jennifer Wu visited our office 6 months after funding had closed to conduct another formal quarterly review. By this point, we had grown to 19 consultants, were generating revenue at an annual run rate of $6 million, and had a pipeline of potential engagements that suggested continued strong growth. The office that had felt crowded when we were 7 people was now bursting at the seams with 19, and we were actively searching for larger space that could accommodate the 30 to 40 people we expected to have within another 6 months. Jennifer reviewed our progress metrics with her characteristic thoroughness, comparing actual performance against the projections we had established during due diligence. On most dimensions, we were tracking ahead of or in line with expectations. Revenue growth was strong. Client satisfaction remained exceptional. Consultant utilization rates suggested we were effectively balancing training and development against billable client work. The quality of our deliverables, as measured by client feedback and internal review processes, had remained high despite rapid team growth. But Jennifer identified a critical gap in our organizational structure that was limiting our growth potential. We had successfully scaled our consulting delivery capability, but we had not built a dedicated business development function that could generate client demand at the rate we needed to keep our growing team fully utilized. Current client acquisition was happening primarily through referrals from satisfied clients and through my personal network, both of which were valuable but insufficient to support aggressive continued growth. If we wanted to reach 50 consultants and $20 million in revenue within 2 years, we needed systematic client acquisition processes rather than relying on organic referrals. You need to hire a head of business development within the next 60 days, Jennifer said, pulling up an organizational chart that showed the gap she had identified. Someone who can build outbound sales capability, develop strategic partnerships with referral sources, and create marketing systems that generate qualified leads at scale. Right now, you are the primary business developer, but your time is increasingly consumed by leadership and organizational development responsibilities. You cannot continue personally generating all new client relationships while also building the internal systems and culture required for a 50-person organization. The assessment was accurate but uncomfortable. I had always enjoyed the business development aspect of consulting, the conversations with potential clients about their challenges, the creative problem solving about how our approach could help them achieve their goals, the relationship building that led from initial contact to signed engagement. Hiring someone else to take over that function felt like giving up something I was good at and enjoyed doing. But Jennifer was right that my time needed to shift toward building organizational capabilities, rather than personally executing all critical functions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.